Are you all right, Dot?
I'm all right.
Good. Would you like to tell us a bit about who you are?
Sure thing. Don't even know what to tell you.
I thought you were going to say, I don't even know who I am.
I don't know who I am anymore. Who am I? I'm Dot. I know Charlie through our work. So I work for the Diocese of Chelmsford as a youth advisor, and I support youth workers in their jobs and kind of, provide training and support. And I've been doing that job for 3 years now. And apart from that, I live near Colchester. I love crochet. I enjoy being outside and running. I love to cook and eat food. And I'm married. And this year during lockdown, we have bought a van and converted it into a caravan. And it's not finished yet, but we very much enjoy van life and planning our adventures for when we can actually leave the country.
And you did manage a very brief trip in the van between lockdowns.
That's right. We spent an amazing 3 weeks in Scotland over the summer. So we definitely want to go back there. It wasn't brief, it was 3 weeks. It was amazing.
Why in my head was it not? Why has time just become this like really weird concept?
I know.
Because in my head you weren't gone that long, but you really were.
Yeah. Plus, it's just like, I know we say this every year, but how is it already nearly December?
I know, even more so this year.
Yeah.
I am.
It just feels like everything has happened and nothing has happened this year.
Yeah. It's been like the longest year, but also the shortest year. Do you think there's anyone out there with the surname Santa?
Ooh, that's a good... I think there might be,
You think Mr. and Mrs. or Mr. and Mr., Mrs. and Mrs.?
I think so. Because, there is like a place in the States that's called Santa Fe.
Oh, true. Yeah.
That has got nothing to do with Santa.
That's true. Do you think a lot of people go there thinking like it's his holiday destination?
Maybe.
It's like Lapland. That's static where he stays most of the time. And then he occasionally gets a vacation and he heads to Santa Fe.
Yeah.
Well, what were we going to talk about, Dot?
I think we were going to talk about being heard.
Being heard.
Being heard.
In some ways, we live in a society where it feels like we're heard all the time because we're like connected more. But then in other ways, it feels like we're not heard at all. It's a strange one.
It's like we're just bombarded by what people are saying to us all the time.
Yeah. You hear the opinions of people that you've never met, and like you would never have been in that position, even like 20 years ago, like, or less. Like it was just not as well connected a society, which has its pros, like has its really good things about it, but it also has its like negatives as well. You feel like you say bombarded with opinions all the time. And how does your opinion get heard in it? Like that is
I kind of feel like people are much more comfortable to express very extreme opinions, like that they might not say to you into your face, but they're quite happy to write some extreme comments on the internet and just not worry about it.
Yeah. And it's crazy, isn't it? Like how a lot of the things that we say online, we might not say in person. Yeah. That for me, like, because I didn't grow up in a time where that was a thing, seeing young people now having this, access to all this information, but also hearing people say things that they might not say to their face, like that must be a really confusing world to grow up in. I think for me that would have been really confusing.
And also like it makes me feel almost like if I don't have an extreme opinion on something, it makes me feel like I should, because it
Yeah.
seems to me like everybody does have like some opinion on everything, and I'm just like, well, actually, I don't have an opinion on that. Do I need to have one?
Yeah, like you've got to be for or against something. You can't just be like working it out. You've got to be sorted on everything. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
actually, like I'm not sure how I feel about that, or I I can see both sides, or you can't have that. Like you feel like you can't. You can have that, but you feel like you can't. Yeah, it's a strange society some of the time.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a situation where you feel like you haven't been heard?
I think lots.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of an example. So I think with my work, I often end up in like, through my work, I have like the opportunity to speak up on issues around young people, and they often end up being in like spaces and conversations where people are actively asking, you know, what have young people got to say about this? Well, I'm kind of maybe I'm being invited along because people feel they should, I don't know, but often I am the youngest person in the room myself, and I also often am the only female in the room. And so sometimes when I go into those conversations, or I am in those spaces, I feel like whatever I've got to say isn't really going to be heard, or everybody else has got so much, you know, so much more to contribute than me, or they have a much better opinion than me, or they're much older and wiser and educated than me, so why should I say something? And also, like, I often feel like whatever comes out of my mouth makes sense in my head, but when I say it, people just don't get it. So I have this real fear. I have this real fear, like, of, and I genuinely like believe that this is true, although like I think it isn't, but it like one of my core beliefs is like that whatever I say doesn't make sense to people. And so it's like I always worry that I'm finding it really difficult to just have like to ad lib. Or if I was to be asked to like do some public speaking without having prepared, I'd be like, I'm just not going to make any sense because I have to prepare for this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it's often the belief in ourselves like that affects like how we feel we're heard, like in the sense of, you know, do we feel like what we've got to say is valuable to other people? Do we feel like what we've got to say is coherent? Like, does it make sense? And actually, I mean, I've never heard you say anything in any meeting or in any environment that doesn't make sense. So there you
I
go.
think that is the funny thing though, I think, about being, well, not funny actually, it's just the frustrating thing about this thing of being heard. I think actually all of us have this desire to be heard and to be seen, but we have these irrational fears that for one reason or another other people don't understand where we're coming from.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, yeah, I get people tell me this time and time again, like in a previous job, whenever like I had like my annual review, I would bring this up and be like, I want to work on my communication skills because I feel like no one understands me.
I feel like those are like spot on.
People would always say that to me, and they'd be like, but there's nothing you have to work on. And I'm just like, but no, I do. So it's just weird. I think some things we just like, I'll just tell ourselves because we've been telling ourselves the same thing over and over and over again that we just started to believe it.
And also we're so critical of ourselves, like so much more critical of ourselves than other people. That's often the way, isn't it? And also like there's this inner voice in all of us that's like so hard because all the time it's with you. It's not something you can just put to one side and say, well, I'm not going to listen to that. It takes a lot to and a lot of energy to not have that at the forefront of everything you're doing.
Yeah.
So that definitely has an influence on how we communicate, or how we feel we communicate with other people, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think also being, growing up, it's often reinforced as a good thing. It's when you're the person who just stands in line and does the right thing all the time, it's kind of being rewarded rather than rewarding when you have a different opinion, or you have something to bring that's different or kind of stands out. And maybe I don't know whether that's a generational thing, so I don't know whether that's changed. I kind of feel like I see it much more now in schools that young people are included in making decisions about what school looks like, what happens there. And I think much more can be done, but I feel like things have changed a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think also just the fact that, that young people are standing up on issues like the environment and racism and sexuality and all those kind of things, I think is it's amazing, because I would have not felt able to do that when I was younger. And I think it's just so good to exercise our voice and our opinion in that way. I think some of it is about that saying of giving someone else a voice is actually, a voice isn't really anyone's to give. It's we all have a voice.
Yeah.
And I think it's about everybody just recognizing that within the other person and giving that voice space. So I think it's you can do those things in day-to-day conversations, and actually paying full attention to whatever someone else is saying and encouraging them to say something. Noticing when someone isn't saying something and saying, what do you think about that? I think sometimes it needs us to be the first person to help someone else to speak up. And that then has a snowball effect and leads to a society where more and more people are able to be heard.
Yeah. I think as well, one thing that I try and do as much as possible when I'm mentoring a young person is when they tell you about something that's happening, or something that's affecting them, I try and ask them how it makes them feel. Because I think often we don't sit back and think, how am I feeling about this? We're always trying to think about, how's that affecting somebody else, or what have I got to do in response to that, or something like that. But we don't often sit back and think, how am I feeling right now? How does that affect me? How does that make me feel? Am I unsettled? Does it make me feel okay? It's one of them things that I think in society we just don't often ask one another. And we don't ever ask ourselves, really, how does that make me feel? We're not always that aware of our own emotions.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. What would you consider being heard means?
So I think being heard, but the whole fear of not being heard for me comes up usually when it's got something to do with saying something or writing something or expressing my opinion. But actually, I think what I've come to realize that being heard actually is really closely connected with knowing myself and really giving myself space to be the person that I'm made to be, and living my life to the full, and not feeling afraid of that. So, for example, just over 2 years ago, I made the decision to go vegan, and that's in a way that isn't me saying something. And actually, I try not to be that vegan who talks about being vegan all the time, but it is actually making a statement, and it is letting other people know what my values are and how I live my life. And it does have an impact on, well, what I eat, but also what I buy, how I what happens when we go out for dinner or, you know, whatever. It is me putting myself out there and telling the world who I am. And I think in the same way, it's also around things like, what I choose to wear or the kind of music I listen to and things like that. It's just, I think if we learn to find our confidence in those things, if they build up over time, then you will end up becoming much more confident around the things you say as well. Sometimes I find it much easier to like just practice things. It's just like, because you can just do those things. Like I can, you know, practice. I don't actually have to talk to people about being vegan. I could just try and do that and figure it out. And then when I feel confident, I can tell people about it. Or I know that lots of people are thinking about how they can buy more ethical clothing. Like that's not something you just have to go like from not buying ethical clothing to just buying ethical clothing. It's like something that you grow in. And I think it's a really healthy exercise because one, it means you learn how to be kind to yourself and be like, well, actually, I haven't got money to buy a really expensive piece of clothing right now. But, you know, how does it have an impact on the rest of my life? All those kind of things. And you learn how to like practice those principles that are actually really important to practice when it comes to saying something to other people and expressing your opinion through words.
Can you do that?
No. The dog. Oh, it's the phone.
Someone is calling from Aberystwyth.
Oh.
I know no one in Aberystwyth. How have you felt like lockdown has like had an impact on how you're heard?
Oh, that's a good question.
I just on the spot.
Yeah, no, good question. Well done.
I'm proud. Thank you. I feel that's an achievement.
Yeah.
I can pick that off the list for the day.
Yeah, nice.
And that.
Came up with an idea.
Yeah.
Exercised it. I think actually lockdown in a really funny way has, like, this year I've had some of the most open and honest conversation with people that I've ever had. So I feel like it's made me more confident to really be myself with other people, because it kind of feels like I need to connect with people in a more meaningful way. So like lots of friends from like who live in London who I got to know in my previous job, who I didn't really stay in touch with that much, who this year I really kind of contacted again, and we just had some of the most amazing conversations. So I think it's kind of made me brave to like invest in friendships in a deeper way and to really be who I am with those people. And maybe got to do with the fact of like realizing, you know, that our life's limited, and also like I just wanted to connect with people. It's just like can't get out of the house, like it's hard for me to just like do all the things that I love to do. So there's that kind of longing to get in touch with people, isn't there?
Definitely. I think it's been quite a powerful time for connections and relationships. I think like me and some of the people that I'm doing training with for ordination training, and we said like some people have never physically met before because we've been obviously doing a lot of things online, but it feels like those connections in some ways are even stronger than if we'd known each other for a year in person, because we've all gone through this shared experience in a way together and all invested in one another and in supporting each other through it, which you might not have got at another time. Trying to take those like positive things from it, and in what is obviously a very negative time in general, and quite an unsettling time in general, but take those positives and use them for good. Definitely. So in some ways some people, not everyone obviously, but some people have felt more heard during this time than they have before, and for other people they've felt far less heard. And I think it is important really important that everybody is heard. And I know we say it a lot and like, oh, you know, but in the sense of, I think it is a human need.
Yeah.
It's a thing that is a part of life. Like, it's essential that everybody, you know, whether they're, you know, heard in the same way, that everybody is able to express themselves and be noticed in that.
Yeah.
I don't mean like, you know, be like famous for it or whatever, or be a celebrity or whatever, but everybody is heard by the people around them and has the same opportunities as everybody else to be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, like, especially as we, like, in you know, the next few years reflect on this year and COVID and all those things, I feel like we've been trying to figure out, you know, what's the experience been like for people, what's the kind of headlines. It's like, we can't expect that everybody had the same experience, and I think it's really important that we enable as many people as possible to share the impact that this year's had on them, because it's different for every single person, and we need to give space to those voices and try and understand and be compassionate about how other people are experiencing it.
I think as well it's quite timely that, and it shows how important it is that during this year, which, you know, has been in mostly turmoil, that the Black Lives Matter protests and the movement really, you know, was a big, oh my gosh, the dog.
Oh, my little Bobby joining in.
But it's been a massive, massive part of the year. And I think for me, my worry is that it's gonna, yawn. My worry is that it will get overlooked again. Like, it was heard so strongly at that time, even amidst all the pandemic, and rightly so, it should be heard. And then it's kind of gone off the radar again. And it feels like it's like history repeating itself. Like, this seems to happen quite a lot, where a big, you know, really needs to be heard issue comes up and then gets swept under the carpet again. And I think it is our responsibility. I mean, we are fortunate in our position where we can help people be heard, but I think it is just a human responsibility to really look at that and say, what can we do to make sure that this doesn't ever go unheard again?
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting how that's come up in a year that has been like it has.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, so many people, the thing that I, you know, keeps coming back to me is, you know, when classes and students look back in years to come on 2020, when we were all sat there at New Year like, yes, start of a new decade, woo, here we are, 11 months later, like, I haven't left the house.
Yeah, nothing's happened.
But like, it's kind of in that whole frame of looking at 2020, people are going to think, oh, that was COVID year. Like, that was, you know, the year that COVID came, really. I know it's 2019, but it was the year that it had the impact.
Yeah.
Internationally. Are people going to remember that it was also a year where these movements and these anti-racism protests happened, and people who hadn't maybe thought of it before and thought of the impact that people have on, you know, racism and how their actions influence other people's lives. That was also that year as well. Like, I know it's been an issue for as long as humanity, you know, but it's been one of those years where there have been so many things that could be overlooked in the future, because this will always be labelled as COVID year.
Yeah.
And yes, COVID, you know, a major issue, but there are other issues as well that we need to not oversee.
Yeah. I was just thinking, it's really interesting how, I mean, as you say, you know, like racism, Black Lives Matter, all that kind of stuff, it's been going on for years. You know, it's like George Floyd was not the first black person to be killed, and in the circumstances he was. But what I thought was really interesting is that this whole thing was about his voice not being heard. You know, him saying, I can't breathe, and people not hearing, and or not choosing to react in a way that changes the situation. And so I think really, I almost wonder whether actually going forward the thing is not about creating these big public campaigns for change, although I think they're necessary. I think the way in which those things will stop to be token is if when we actually start to amplify other people's voices, is giving space to other people's stories that are different to ours. So, you know, it's about making sure that we actively seek out as individuals, like people that are different to us, and trying to hear their stories and sharing them with other people. Because if all of us do that, then I think that will have a much bigger impact than it just being a news story. It kind of has to trickle down into our day-to-day behaviors, doesn't it? So it might be, you know, speaking to someone at school that you don't know, or that it seems like no one else wants anything to do with them, or whatever, or doing the same at work, or I don't know, like maybe even sometimes I think it's just like going to like takeaway shop that you've never been to, and like trying different food. I think it's just like all about like exploring what other people's, like people who live their lives differently, giving them room in your life, and you know, trying to get a glimpse of what their lives are like and what impact that can have on yours.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I like, from a Christian perspective, like, you know, there's this, in the sense of having a faith, I think people worry that by discussing it with you, or like discussing how you see the world in some way, that they are going to have to see it from your perspective. And actually, I think that is something that can be applied to a fear that is generally in society of, well, you know, if somebody has a different opinion to me and starts talking to me about it, I'm never going to be able to see it from their perspective because I don't believe what they believe in, or I don't follow the same thing, or I don't wear the same clothes, or you know, it can be applied to anything, not just faith and religion, but it can be applied to all sorts of things. And I think that is a culture we need to work. We need to obviously work in it, but we need to also be making it more healthy, in the sense of an understanding of disagreeing well and learning how to manage conversation well. And the pressure should be off of people, and knowing that you don't have to agree with someone or share their beliefs to have a conversation that has a positive outcome. And that positive outcome can be that, you know, you're united on the fact that all children should be fed, and all children should be safe, all people shouldn't be, no one should ever feel under threat, you know, like all these different things, which actually are a massive, not just in religions and faiths, but they are a massive part of general society sort of ethos, you know, like we should be united on things like that. So you had a good idea of like what is something that you can take away from what we've been talking about. So
I think it's this whole thing that you kind of spoke about earlier around how actually we need to learn how to have good conversations with other people.
Yeah.
And what good conversation means, because maybe a good conversation doesn't mean, it's kind of turning on a flip side. I think we all long for being heard, but actually maybe to make a conversation a good conversation, it's not about trying as much as possible for ourselves to be heard, but allowing the other person to be heard, and then trusting that somewhere in the process it'll all come back to you, and actually it'll end up in a place where, because they know that you've heard them, they will also look to hear you.
Yeah, that's true. It's about listening and not necessarily wanting something out of that, you know, in the sense of not wanting your opinion to be louder than the other person's, but wanting equality within it. I think that's very important. Yeah, definitely.
What about you?
I think I agree, you know. I think it's something that our society doesn't do very well. Like, we don't see it modelled very well in government or in leadership, in many things, really. We just don't see it. And I think, you know, for me, you know, one of the biggest things is unity. And that doesn't mean that we have to all have the same opinion or that we all have to agree on everything, but it means that we have to learn and accept one another for who we are. And I think for me, that's one of the things, you know, Jesus' biggest prayer, and like unanswered prayer, was that the church and the people would be united. And we so often don't model it well. And there is such a long way to go, and such potential. And, you know, often the church does not model Jesus well. And I think there are great examples of it, you know, it actually doing that, but there are many examples of the church not modelling what Jesus asked us to model. And I think we need to get better at that. Yeah, much better at that.
So true.
So you are a legend. Thank you very much. And I hope that we can see you soon, like actually in person.
That'd be really nice.
It would be lovely, wouldn't it? Absolutely. But at the moment, we just have to be thankful for Zoom. Thank you, my dear.
All right, thank you.
Take care.
You too.